La séance ouverte. Est-ce que vous entendez tous l'interprétation? J'entends de l'écho.
Welcome to meeting number 24 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. The Board of Internal Economy requires that committee adheres to the following health protocols. Please maintain a physical distance of at least 2 meters from others. Wear a non-medical mask unless you are seated, and preferably wear a mask at all times, including when seated. Maintain proper hand hygiene by using the hand sanitizers provided in the committee room, and regularly wash your hands well with soap. As the chair, I will enforce these measures, and I thank you all for your cooperation. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House of Order of January 25th, 2021. I would like to outline a few rules to follow.
You grab me what I printed.
If I can ask all the members to put their microphone on mute. I would like to outline a few rules to follow. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You may speak in the official language of your choice. At the bottom of your screen, you may choose to hear floor audio or in English or French. With the latest Zoom version, you do not need to select a corresponding language channel before speaking. The raise hand feature is on the main toolbar should you wish to speak. A reminder to all members that all comments should be addressed to the chair. When you are not speaking, your microphone should be muted. The committee clerk and I will maintain the speaking list for all members. Before we go into today's meeting, I would just like to advise you on audio issues in the committee. On April 14th, the clerk distributed a letter from Honorable Judy Sigro, chair of the liaison committee, regarding audio issues in committees. All committees, including ours, face the issue of witnesses appearing without proper headsets from time to time, which results in audio problems impacting our interpretation service. The committee previously agreed that all witnesses must have a connection test before appearing as a witness. I have instructed the clerk to take further measures to reduce the incidence of witnesses appearing without proper headsets. The clerk will report to me before each meeting on witness preparation. The clerk will revise communications to convey the committee's requirements more effectively to all the witnesses. Members may wish to set stricter outcomes for witnesses who do not have proper headsets, and I can raise this issue with the committee when we next consider committee business. Today, the committee is resuming the study of the labor market impact assessment under the temporary foreign workers program, and we will be hearing from the witnesses. Before we go to the witnesses, I would welcome a new member to this committee, Maninder Sidhu. He is now on the CIMM committee. So welcome, Mr. Sidhu, and we look forward to working with you. Today, in our first panel, we will be hearing from United Food and Commercial Workers Union Canada, being represented by Derek Johnstone, Special Assistant to the National President. We will also be hearing from Fédération des Chambres de Commerce du Québec, being represented by Charles Milliard, President and Chief Executive Officer, also joined by Alexandre Gergen, Vice President, Employment and Human Capital. Our third witness for today would be Association Québec des Avocats en droit d'immigration, being represented by Krishna Gagne, lawyer and Vice President for Economic Affairs. I would like to welcome all the witnesses for appearing before the committee today, and we look forward to hearing from you. We will start with United Foods and Commercial Workers Union Canada. Derek Johnstone, Special Assistant to the National President. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of the United Food and Commercial Workers, I'd like to thank the Standing Committee for the opportunity to share our perspective today, and also for the work of the committee on this important subject. But before I put forward some of our thoughts, perhaps it might be a good idea to say a few words about who we are. The UFCW is the voice of Canada's food workers. We are one of the country's largest unions, and we are very proud and privileged to represent more than 250,000 hardworking people across Canada. About 80% of our membership works in food-related sectors, and as we like to say, you can find UFCW members everywhere in the food chain, from field to fork. And throughout the pandemic, our members have played a central role in holding the front line by providing the food and other crucial products and services that Canadians need for their day-to-day lives. With regard to the discussion today, I must say that UFCW is very concerned about the exponential growth of the temporary foreign workers program in recent years. And we strongly recommend a more varied approach to the labor market challenges facing particular industries and the agri-food sector in particular. Key to a better way forward is the expansion of federal and provincial nominee programs. And at the same time, much more must be done in terms of making sure that Canadians are fully equipped to take advantage of the opportunities that exist in the labor market, and government needs to ensure that everyone is treated fairly once they are there. With that in mind, UFCW sees the federal government's decision to create an additional 30,000 pathway opportunities for so-called low-skilled migrants as an important step forward. However, we are concerned that this is a one-time offer, and it's more about backfilling immigration targets for the year and less about establishing citizenship pathways as a fundamental element of a reformed temporary foreign workers program. And as we've learned through our experience with Agri-Food Pilot, a level 4 language requirement is a major barrier to most migrants in the food sector being able to take advantage of PR opportunities. Creating more accessible pathways to citizenship is critical, but so too is the need to develop more inclusive labor markets and more inclusive policy discussions about meeting the labor challenges of core sectors. Prior to COVID, there were roughly 1.3 million Canadians on social assistance, which represents about 7% of the total labor force. Plus, there were millions of additional Canadians who were either unemployed or underemployed. Yet from the year 2000 to 2017, the total percentage of Canada's GDP dedicated to active labor market programs shrunk by 77%, going from 0.39 to 0.22. And during that same period, we saw annual migrant worker usage grow by 250%, going from roughly 134,000 to 335,000. The point is that the approach to sourcing labor has become very passive. And the LMIA process is a good example of this. To access migrants, an employer must post the vacancy to the federal job bank. And they must also demonstrate 2 additional recruitment initiatives, one of which could be posting the job on their own website. But there is zero requirement for employers to engage other stakeholders. And with the demise of the Federal Sector Council program, there is no forum in Canada for stakeholders to come together and work towards sector solutions, which is a real shame because UFCW, for instance, is very well positioned to help develop engagement and deliver training for a number of NOCs in migrant reliant sectors. We represent more than 250,000 workers and their families in over 600 communities across the country. Many of our members are underemployed and looking for more standard opportunities. And if employers were compelled to work with us on these issues, perhaps through the LMIA process, it could result in better outcomes that benefit, in our case, the agri-food sector as a whole. In any event, the last thing we want as the Food Workers Union is to see Canada become even more reliant on a temporary, precarious, and vulnerable workforce, just like we now have in primary agriculture. To do so would mean less stability and security for some of Canada's most crucial sectors. Plus, it belies...
Sorry for interrupting, Mr. Johnstone. Your time is up. You will get an opportunity to talk further when we go into our round of questioning. We will now go to Mr. Milliard, representing Fédération des Chambres de Commerce du Québec. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and committee members. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to discuss with us the labor market impact assessment required for employers to hire foreign temporary workers. This is a topic that is of great interest to our organization and the 50,000 businesses that we represent in Quebec. I would just like to talk a little bit about how Quebec is special when it comes to immigration, because we have jurisdiction on selecting permanent immigrants, and that means that Quebec employers have two systems of policies and administration policies that they have to follow. And there are criticisms, not only by immigrants, but also by employers, organizations, specialists, about the wait times that are involved. In Quebec, it takes 27 months for an immigrant who wants to settle in Quebec and 6 months on average elsewhere. These wait times create headaches for everyone involved in Quebec, and many people then turn to temporary immigration programs so that they can get into Quebec more quickly, and then they transition toward the Quebec selection program. We have temporary workers in the agricultural sector, but people want to immigrate permanently, and this is what the TFWP is often used for. Quebec employers must both have their LMIA approved by the provincial government and by the federal government. The changes made in 2014 to the program created a lot of anxiety for Quebec employers. The restrictions came at a time when there was a decrease in working age Quebecers. We had full employment and high numbers of vacant positions, and the TFWP has not changed to meet the needs. We've got a pandemic situation, and we have 148,500 vacant positions in Quebec, which is a record. Now, we have 5 suggested amendments, and I want to present them quickly. The first is that recent changes to the Quebec Experience program have opened the door to requesting permanent residency, but there's a requirement for 2 years of work experience. And this means that the work permits have to be systematically renewed. And so we would ask for just an extension without an administrative burden attached to it. The second recommendation is that employers needing the program are always the same in most cases, and most of them have shown that they follow the rules and that they treat their workers well. So we would like to have a trusted employer program for them. The third recommendation is the following. The list of eligible occupations should be simplified and should be selected by the government of Quebec. We've had quite an increase from 2015 to 2020, 37 up to 221. But we find that needs are still not being met, and we need to extend the occupation list to include semi-skilled and low-skill occupations. And I mentioned the 148,000 vacant positions that we're trying to fill in Quebec. The fourth recommendation, the process for the LMIA has other requirements, including a transition plan. And this requirement might be legitimate if the program is used just for temporary purposes, as it was initially designed. But let's be honest, people are using it for longer-term purposes. And so we should make sure that that is possible. The final recommendation is that the cap should be brought back to 20%, and because 10% is just too low. So there's a lot of work for you as parliamentarians to do, but we really want to make sure that the needs of our businesses are matched with the desire to have people come and settle. Thank you.
Proceed to Madame Gagné, Lawyer and Vice President for Economic Affairs. Madame Gagné, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please proceed. You are on mute, please. Bonjour, désolé.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to talk to you on behalf of the Quebec Association of Immigration Lawyers. We have some comments because we see what is happening on the ground. We work with businesses and we know what is involved in the application and process and the wait time. Mr. Millard gave quite a number of comments that we share. We want to emphasize the fact that the 10% limit for low-wage positions doesn't take into account the difficulties of recruiting employees in rural areas. And it makes it difficult for companies to maintain these positions. So what businesses want is to have, for the next 3 years, a removal of the cap, or at least an increase. The businesses find that they can't achieve new contracts because they can't get enough foreign workers. And that brings me to my next point, which is this limit of 10%. We know that there is a contradiction between the aims and the actual processes, and there needs to be a tighter match. Somebody who earns $23 an hour will not be at the level that is aimed at by the caps that are set. So we can't really combine all these groups and do the calculation and meet the requirements. When someone is required under the legislation, we need to take into account the workers that have a low wage at the moment, because otherwise it doesn't work well for the businesses. What businesses are calling for is to have a simplified process and to include everyone in there that needs to be, so that the calculations work out properly. Concerning the simplified process, the process has recognition from the government that a number of occupations and positions can be included in it because there is already acknowledgement of the requirements, and so the employers have a lot of additional work that is not helpful. Employers, when they need employees, need to act quickly. It isn't in a year that they need them right now. So the process can get in the way of hiring foreign workers. As well, there are often random requirements and time frames for a given position that don't take into account how difficult it can be to hire workers in rural areas. It can take at least 36 months for all the positions, whether we're talking about the simplified or the regular process. The processing times don't take into account the urgent need of the businesses. As I mentioned, they need these workers right away, and they can't wait. When they go through the whole process, it takes at least a year, even 14 or 15 months. So we need to recognize the current shortage of workers and the urgent needs. As Mr. Millard mentioned, I'm sorry.
Your time is up. You will get an opportunity to talk further when we go into our round of questioning. Thanks to all the witnesses for their opening remarks. We will now start with our first round of questioning of 6 minutes each. We will start with Mr. Seaback. Mr. Seaback, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Sorry about that, Madam Chair. I didn't think it was my round, but that's okay. I will forge ahead. For everyone on the panel today, I have certainly had experience as a former member of Parliament in a riding where there was a lot of temporary foreign workers, and the LMIA process was one that I repeatedly heard from employers. It was difficult, it was costly, took a long time to process. So for our panelists today, what would be the biggest thing that you would suggest that we could do to improve the LMIA process?
Perhaps I could start, if I may. Some aspects are urgently needed. First of all, we need a trusted employer program for employers who have used the program properly. They have shown that they treat employees well, so that we can have a program that can be based on that experience and can help these businesses avoid the paperwork and get the foreign temporary workers that they need. So that would be one suggestion I would make.
Does anybody else want to jump in on that?
I would just add that I don't think it should be made easier, quite frankly. I think as long as the conversion numbers of especially in the so-called low-skilled stream of the program, where you have very low conversion numbers of migrants to permanent residents and Canadian citizens, as long as that becomes a reality in the program, I don't think a feature of the program should be making it easier to sustain and grow a system that doesn't allow people the opportunity to become Canadians. So I think when we're talking about looking at the LMIA program and reforms there, we need to be mindful of looking at the TFWP as a whole and questioning some of the fundamental objectives of the program and the impact that that program is having on labor markets, especially when you have large concentrations of migrants, and what that means for domestic labor sources. But if to date, the barriers for low skilled workers are immense. And until that's addressed, I don't think we can, in good conscience, talk about making it easier for firms to bring in vulnerable migrants.
you want to expand and say, have a little more time to say what those changes are that you would make? I know you've touched on some of these, but
Well, for the program overall, I think
yes.
that like I said in my opening remarks, I think that the government's recent announcement about um, allowing for 30,000 low-skilled migrants to achieve PR is a good first step. I think we need that sort of those significant numbers annually, but we have to be realistic too. Look at Canada. Canada's whole story is about uh, hardworking folks coming here, having the opportunity to advance their dreams. Did they speak level 4 English every time they came here? Absolutely not. I'm sure we all have stories in our families where our ancestors who came here, or our parents who came here, or ourselves who came here. I wonder how many of them could have passed the level 4 English exam. Probably not many. We have to be mindful of our own narrative as Canadians. And that needs to be reflective in all programs that have um, a pathway to citizenship. And this increasingly, the temporary foreign workers program increasingly is becoming the predominant gateway to this country. And we can't have a system that gives preferential status to, let's face it, an elite set within the labor market, whereby letting thousands, in some cases, people of 20, 30, 40 years doing this every year, being on a hamster wheel without ever having the opportunity to lay down roots and really invest themselves in this country and help build our country for the future. So it needs to start there. In terms of the LMIA itself, I think there's an opportunity, and we've seen this in other industrialized economies, to involve some key stakeholders, such as trade unions, um, in terms of trying to fill these spots.
30 seconds left.
UFCW has some leading training programs. I have no doubt that many of our members would love to work in certain sectors that are becoming reliant on migrants, but employers are not compelled to work with us. Employers, there is no doubt, would prefer in many cases to work with the existing TFWP than to collaborate with some other stakeholders in terms of trying to place domestic labor sources in those roles.
I think that's about my time.
Yes, thank you. We will now move on to Mr. Shifke. Mr. Shifke, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Je veux remercier
I want to thank the witnesses this afternoon, Mr. Millard, Ms. Gagné, and Mr. Johnstone, and Mr. Gagnon. I want to thank you all. Mr. Millard and Mr. Gagnon, I have two questions for you, but I first want to thank you for the work that you are doing on behalf of the 50,000 firms across the province of Quebec who will count on you during a very difficult period. So thank you for your hard work. You have answered my first question because I was going to ask you what we could do and for some concrete examples of how we can improve immigration in Canada. So thank you for your 5 recommendations regarding how we can improve the system. And thank you for mentioning the situation with employment in Quebec. There are 148,000 vacant positions in Quebec, as you mentioned. I think it's important that we talk about that in the report when we talk about how we can improve the immigration system. People don't understand the impact of labor shortages on businesses in Quebec. So my question for you, Mr. Millard and Mr. Gagnon, is I hope in the few minutes we have that you can give me some examples of the problems created by the shortage of semi-skilled and skilled workers for firms in Quebec. Can you give me some concrete examples of what this means for entrepreneurs and businesses? Thank you. I will give Alexandre the floor because he's our specialist in labor, but certainly the labor shortage is a huge problem in Quebec and across Canada. Before the pandemic, it was a problem, and it is still a problem now. And it is an obstacle to development in a number of regions in Quebec. We can have generous programs at the provincial and federal level, but we need the people. So if we want businesses to innovate, to do things online, to export abroad, then we need the people to do it. It's really the fabric of our recovery efforts. We have a lot of discussion with the Quebec immigration authorities because we feel that things aren't being done the way we think they need to be. We have had less to do with the federal minister, but certainly employers in Quebec feel that they don't have all the factors for success that they need. I'll give the floor now to Alexandre. Thank you, and thank you for the question. Certainly, labor shortages are a huge problem. First of all, we know that health, education come under provincial jurisdiction, and 3 people are available for every 10 positions, for example, in health. So that means that when we have retirements, we're not even able to replace 1 out of every 2 people who leave. And this is true in other sectors like manufacturing. We have many, many vacant positions. They are not always high-skilled positions or high-level positions. There are additional obstacles when it comes to temporary workers. So when we are talking about opening up the list of occupations that could come under the simplified process, that would mean that manufacturing firms could have access to this very urgently needed labor source. Thank you. I talk to entrepreneurs in my riding of Vaudreuil-Soulanges, and every week people tell me about their needs for workers. Something has to change. So once again, thank you very much for all your hard work, for helping our entrepreneurs in Quebec, and for being here with us today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, I'm done with my questioning. Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Mr. Shifke. We will now proceed on to Madame Normandin. You will have 6 minutes for your round of questions. You can please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to thank the panel of witnesses, high-quality witnesses we have today. I think we could spend 2 hours at least with you. So I have a first question. There's a lot that's already been said. So maybe I will go to something else than has already been covered. So perhaps Mr. Millard, Mr. Gagnon, could you tell us if it is true that although the unemployment level isn't that high, that we actually have a great shortage of workers? Well, I can answer your question in part. In fact, the pandemic has meant that there isn't a greater number of employees available. It doesn't mean that the people who have lost their jobs are qualified for the jobs that are open. I can't say whether there are some areas that have been filled, but it doesn't mean that the people that are available are free and also qualified to do the jobs that are open right now. Yes, I agree with Ms. Gagné because we have quite a few people who are unemployed, but that doesn't mean that there is a match between the people available and what employers are looking for. because often there can be a mismatch there. Alexandre, I don't want to take all of your time, but there is unemployment in different sectors, for example, in the hotel industry, the restaurant industry, tourism, and so on. In some cases, though, there are sectors where there are more positions than ever that are available, like the 148,000 that were mentioned. Thank you very much. Directives have been provided by the government concerning unemployment, and we've heard that 6% is the figure being given throughout Canada, but for some some types of jobs, qualifications have to be higher. So should we take into account other factors than the unemployment rate? Yes, because people who are unemployed are still actively looking for work. Either Mr. Gagné or Mr. Millat mentioned it can be a mismatch, and often is. So you can't just say there is unemployment and therefore people will fill these jobs. It isn't like that it actually works. Thank you. If I could just add something. Right now, given the transfers from the federal government, there has been substantial support for employees that have lost their jobs. But unfortunately, there are a number of reasons that people are not looking for jobs or are unemployed, because you really have to have that match between qualifications and the jobs that are available, and we don't always have that. So the 6% full employment figure doesn't always apply. I want to come back to labor mobility. I've heard from a number of firms that because of the problems with work permits, I can't necessarily get foreign workers, and I can't renew the work permit easily. So you can't take somebody, for example, with a work permit one place and take them somewhere else to work. So should there be a little more flexibility? If somebody doesn't have work in Montreal, should we be able to take the person to a rural region, for example, where there is a need? Well, I think we do need a more open system. I think that we need to be able to take people from one sector to another and also from one position to another within a firm. If somebody is working for 2 or 3 years in a firm, then we want to give the person some opportunities. If an employer doesn't have enough work at one point, then it should be possible to transfer the person to another employer. However, we need to be careful because there can be a lot of administrative work involved in ensuring that mobility. And so there has to be a return on that investment.
Sorry for interrupting, Mr. Gare. Your time is up. We will now proceed to Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you have 6 minutes for your round of questionings. You can please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for their presentations. My question goes to Mr. Johnstone. I know that UFCW has worked extensively with the migrant workers sector, advocating for the rights and addressing many of the concerns that migrant workers are faced with. Now, with respect to the issue around accessing landed status, the government actually previously used to have a program that would bring in permanent residents, immigrants to the country for all kinds of skill levels, from high to medium to low, the full range. That's now been done away with. Do you think that that Canada would benefit from bringing back such a program, and particularly to address the issue around the high number of temporary foreign workers to which Canada is now relying on?
In terms of permanent immigration,
Yes.
absolutely. I think it's fundamental to addressing a lot of the concerns I think raised uh, during the conversation so far, but also as a trade union. And you touched on our work a bit, Ms. Kwan. Is we of course are focused on helping uh, migrant workers, predominantly in the agricultural sector, um, to assert their rights as best they can. Currently, under the system, you have a migrant worker who is tied to a single employer. Um, that employer may or may not be a responsible employer. There are many responsible employers in the system, but we know through 30 years of doing this, and all you have to do is pick up the Globe and Mail or pick your mainstream publication to read about all the irresponsible employers. And in that scenario, a migrant worker really has an opportunity either to put up with it or to go back to their source country, which may not be an option. One of the themes that's been covered widely is that there are a lot of crooked recruitment firms who have really made hay with the temporary foreign workers program as it stands now. We have people coming from places like Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico, of course, paying upwards of $10,000 for the opportunity to pick tomatoes in Canada. They get that money from loan sharks. They get that money from organized crime. They get it where they can because the fact is, it is a life-changing opportunity for folks, and there are a bunch of unscrupulous characters, actors in the mix who capitalized on the desperation of workers, which creates a very vulnerable and precarious population. The truth is, labor mobility within the system will help to some extent with that, but it won't it won't have a dramatic effect on the situation. The only way that changes is if these folks have status. These folks become permanent residents on track to be Canadians. That's the only way to ameliorate vulnerability and precarity in the sector. Or else we'll still hear these stories on a regular basis. And the fact of the matter is, I know that I've heard from my colleagues here a desire to expand the caps in sectors. We know through our experience, when you have a group of highly vulnerable workers in a sector become 20, 30, 40% of the sector, it's inevitable that that will have an impact on standards in the sector, on labor standards in the sector. You get up to a place where there's 60, 70% of vulnerable workers in a sector like we see in primary agriculture. Guess what? You get a labor market ghetto. You get a place where no Canadian in their right mind would want to work. You get a place where health and safety uh, standards are pale in comparison to other dangerous sectors. You have a place where the only way people ever get a wage increase in those sectors is when the minimum wage rates increase. And even then, we have an increasing phenomenon of people being forced to work on the black market. So God knows how much they're getting paid. It's a big problem. I certainly sympathize with some of the business interests on the line, but to our labor economists on the phone, I would say if you have a bunch of unemployed workers and a bunch of jobs, there's obviously some sort of distortion taking place in the labor market with a temporary foreign workers program, hundreds of thousands in Canada. There is no opportunity for equilibrium in the market, so it never happens. I to the to the free marketers out there, I guess an argument could be made. Um, the way these jobs get better is if we allow the market to do its thing, and that will not happen. That will not happen when you have sectors that are becoming reliant on migrants.
In terms of, thank you. In terms of uh, announcements. The government actually just made a recent announcement for 90,000 TFWs to have access to a pathway for permanent resident status. However, the government actually excluded those who may have lost their status or undocumented workers. What are your thoughts on that? Should the government actually ensure their pathways for those who might have lost their status or those who are already in the country and contributing in many ways?
The question is, why did they lose their status? We know from our work in the heartland of Canadian agriculture, we have a UFCW has had for 2 decades had a center in Leamington, Ontario.
Sorry for interrupting, Mr. Johnstone. Your time is up. We will now proceed to Mr. Soraya. Mr. Soraya, you will have 4 minutes. We will have 4 minutes each for Mr. Soraya and Ms. Dillon, and then 2 minutes each for Madame Normandine and Ms. Cohen before we end this panel. So, Mr. Soraya, you can please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Johnston, since as far as I know, back in 1974 when I arrived in this country, the labor shortage exists. They always have and it always will. LMIA program exists because of the labor shortage. Even today, if you drive from Niagara Falls to Montreal, every single restaurant, if you can see it, most of the workers are the students. Do you think these people have the 2 or 3 years work visa program? Eventually, they should be allowed to apply for the PR, for the permanent residency in this country.
Well, I would just start by stating the fact that when the seasonal agricultural program was established in Canada in 1966, the grand total of temporary foreign workers in Canada was 256. 256. Not that, I guess a decade before the year you mentioned. Now we're upwards of 400,000. The difference was, of course, that for most of our history, you could come to this country and you could build a life. At some point, we've decided to, for skills that some people deem as low skilled, whether it's pulling tomatoes off a vine or clearing tables in a restaurant or being a line cook or being a cashier, like hundreds. There are hundreds, over 1,000 TFWs in Canada who are cashiers, okay? Hairstylists, over 1,000 TFWs in Canada who are hairstylists, okay? Thousands who are here as butchers at the industrial and retail level. These are jobs that were gateway jobs. They were jobs you came to Canada. This is where you started out, and you worked from there, okay? But at some point, we decided that that foreign workers were going to do these jobs, and we were not going to give them an opportunity to become citizens. That's what's changed. So to answer your question, absolutely. Absolutely, they should have the opportunity to become citizens. Just like 75% of our history was based on that. Canada is a nation of immigrants, as we all know. At some point, we've decided that really, and you know, it's interesting. These jobs that we're talking about, these are the frontline jobs throughout COVID. These are the jobs that the media and politicians are calling these people heroes.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to actually, do we let these heroes become Canadians? The answer is no.
These heroes are not even qualified to get their vaccine yet, by the way. Anybody else want to add something up to this?
If you will allow me, we do have common objectives in this regard. We also have concerns regarding the duration and the possibility for these temporary workers regarding permanent residency. We believe that they should be able to have access to a permanent status. We do not agree on certain files with the unions. At some point, we decide that we might refuse them in our programs. And in Quebec, those jobs are long-term jobs. Long-term jobs are being filled by low-skilled workers for permanent needs. We do need them. So we need to give them access to our labor market. We need to allow them to integrate Quebec or Canada to.
Time is up. We will now proceed to Ms. Dillon. Ms. Dillon, you will have 4 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question will be for Mr. Johnston regarding Canada's immigration system is under constant development to ensure that it is as responsive as possible to the ever-changing domestic and international landscape. Labor market trends show that immigration is fundamentally tied to the growth of our populations and the resiliency of our workforce. Pilots like the municipal nominee and rural and northern immigration pilots have been introduced in the immigration system to decentralize immigration from large cities and also to provide stability for workers. Providing immigration certainty for workers and minimizing their exposure to potential exploitation is extremely important. Do you consider economic PR pathways to be the right direction for the government to continue on? And what are some of the policy changes you would like to see to further this goal? Thank you.
They're fundamental. They are fundamental. You mentioned the exploitation of workers, and I've already talked about the in addition to nation building, growing our GDP, population growth is core to that. But again, in terms of if a concern and priority of the federal government is to reduce well-documented worker abuse and exploitation that happens in many instances of the temporary foreign workers program, then permanent immigration must be central to that. And there's an opportunity to do that through the federal and provincial nominee programs. The UFCW was very pleased to see the establishment of a federal nominee program through the agri-food sector. We supported that announcement. We certainly advocated for a federal nominee program for many years, but we have been disappointed by the fact that would have long been the standards for immigration to Canada in terms of wooing high-skilled workers have just been transposed onto low-skilled migrants. There has to be some consideration given to the practical reality that there are some language challenges for some very hardworking migrants. It's an excellent opportunity to take a more stakeholder-oriented approach to easing folks in throughout their quest to get PR. In Manitoba, in the meat sector, one of our locals there, Local 832, UFCW 832, long worked with the provincial government on provincial nominee programs. We offered language training. We worked hand in hand with employers in order to make sure that migrants had the skills they need over time to fully integrate into their communities. We need to have that conversation federally. Like I said in my opening statements, we had a forum 10, 15 years ago. That forum was terminated, was the Federal Sector Council program. We need to get back to sector approaches at the federal level that bring together stakeholders, bring together labor, bring together employers, bring together civil society, bring together the government to work together to think about and come to combine our efforts to put together policy that is not only going to solve the labor needs of our core sectors, but give folks a fighting chance at every level of the labor market to realize their dreams in Canada. That conversation is not taking place. It needs to take place if we're going to seriously reform the program for the better.
Sorry, so your time is up. We will now proceed to Madame Normandin. Madame Normandin, you will have 2 minutes for your round of questions. You can please proceed.
Thank you very much. Mr. Milliard, I would like to ask you a question. Could you go back to your fourth recommendation with regard to the obligation to submit a transition plan? That's something we have not heard a lot at this committee, and maybe your remarks would allow us to better understand this option. Well, in 30 seconds, the idea behind this transition plan is to be able to really look at how we will use temporary workers. In the current situation in Quebec, we know fully well that most people see the temporary foreign workers program as a permanent program. And so we believe what we would like is to allow these people to have a permanent status. Alexandre? Yes, well, the transition plan means that we would allow employers to hire temporary workers, and we would ask them to tell us what they can do to find local workers. But in a context where we have had shortages for years, and economists say that we will still have a shortage for many years to come. So for this transition must be temporary to permanent. Thank you very much. So with labor mobility, with the working permits, we could perhaps make sure that the worker becomes specialized. Yes, indeed. The government is starting to invest to give in training for temporary foreign workers, because we know that these workers are not temporary. We might as well give the workers training, French training, to make sure that they can integrate well. Thank you very much.
We will now end our first panel with Ms. Kwan. Ms. Kwan, you have 2 minutes for your round of questioning.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just going back to Mr. Johnstone, who was just about to talk about the reasons why people lost their status, to my previous question. I wonder if he could finish.
Well, it goes back to my earlier point. A lot of folks are in a situation where they're facing some abusive treatment by employers. They feel obliged. In that scenario, as I said, going home is not really an option for them. The money that they earn in Canada is not only needed to support their families back home, but they may owe it to somebody, so they have to stay here. And the only alternative when you're tied to a single employer and you can't go home is that you go off the grid and you become part of the black labor movement or the black labor market. That's the reality. It's becoming more and more common in high density areas for migrants like Leaming, Ontario in particular. And again, it goes back to my other point. These are the folks who've been picking our food throughout COVID and for the 50 years before that. They're the ones who have really kept some of our most crucial sectors going throughout this period. It seems kind of reckless for us to all of a sudden demand that this skilled group of workers be sent home. Number one, we owe them for the contribution they've made to keeping Canada going over the last year and the decades before that. On top of that, it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do, and we need the skills in this country.
Can I just ask, should the government then change the program and allow for the people who are already here who's lost status to be able to get permanent resident status?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. In terms of final words, we just only have seconds left, I think.
Yes.
What is your most urgent issue that you want the government to take on right now, immediately?
The most urgent issue the government needs to take on right now is to take this, there's this acceptance that the only way to solve labor market challenges in Canada is to open the floodgates to temporary foreign workers who never have the opportunity to become full citizens of this country. We need to abandon that immediately, and we need to start looking at permanent immigration while at the same time properly investing in domestic labor sources as part of a larger strategy.
Sorry for interrupting. Your time is up. With this, I would like to thank our witnesses for appearing before the committee today. If there is anything which you would like to bring to committee's notice and didn't have the time to do, you can always send us a written submission. So with this, our first panel comes to an end, and I will suspend the meeting for 2 minutes so that we can have our witnesses for the second panel sound checked before we proceed. So the meeting is suspended for 2 minutes. Thank you. the Temporary Foreign Workers Program. In this panel, we would be hearing from Mr. Soraya, if you can please mute. I would like to welcome our witnesses for appearing before this committee. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we are joined by Olamal LP, being represented by Louis Banwell, Vice President, Human Resources, and also Isabel LeBlanc, Corporate Director, Human Resources. Our next witness is Canadian Chamber of Commerce, being represented by Lee Nord, Senior Director, Workforce Strategies and Inclusive Growth. And we are also joined by Restaurants Canada, being represented by Lauren Van Den Berg, Executive Vice President, Government Relations. And also we are joined by Olivier Bourbeau, Vice President, Federal and Quebec. Welcome all. All the witnesses will have 5 minutes for the opening remarks, and we will start with Mr. Banwell, Vice President, Human Resources. You can please proceed. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Merci.
Thank you. I'll stay within my 5 minutes, and I'll be sharing my time with my colleague, Ms. Leblanc. I first want to thank the committee for giving us this opportunity to express our concerns about the present labor shortage and to continue to dialogue with the government. We are the major producer of pork and chicken. We have operations in 5 provinces: Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, Quebec, and New Brunswick. We are a key player in the prosperity of our regions. We have been continuing to improve our measures to make sure we optimize all of our operations. But despite all of our efforts locally and internationally, we don't have enough labor to fill all our positions. We are at a critical shortage, and this is affecting our operations across Canada, especially in Quebec and New Brunswick. Right now, we have 27% of positions that are vacant. That means more than 3,700 positions, and we need to fill those positions. Otherwise, our company will decline, and we will not be at full production. We need also to move forward. We're talking about $200 million of earnings and a huge investment. Foreign temporary workers are represented by a union. They have a pension fund. They have the same working conditions as any Canadian employee. They have insurance, and they are treated exactly the same way and protected equally. So we hire these employees with a long-term vision and provide them with all the benefits. One major difficulty in our sector is that we are dependent on primary agriculture. If there is any slowdown in production in the agricultural sector, then it affects us. So we are very much dependent on them. Olimel is of the view that we need to change the LMIA program. We need to address the problem of low-wage employees. We have 600 employees have joined since 2018, and we hope to keep them and bridge them over the next year. I will now call on my colleague. My name is Isabelle Leblanc. I'm the Corporate Director for Human Resources, and so I deal with recruitment. I want to talk to you about some of the problems with the temporary foreign program, worker program. It is not meeting the needs, especially in rural regions, and my colleague just talked about some figures, the high number of positions that we are trying to fill. We have recommendations in our brief, but I want to talk about two main ones. That is the cap and the bridging toward permanent residency. The cap was set arbitrarily at 10%, and that is a huge problem for us. Our recommendation is that since our slaughter operations are dependent on primary agriculture, then we should be dispensed from having to meet that obligation of 10% because we are the next step in the processing chain. It should be increased to 30%, and it should apply to the whole business, not just to the particular types of positions that it does right now. With respect to the bridging toward permanent residency, we have had a recent announcement by the federal government, as you know, and this will enable those with essential workers to make applications. However, our employees are excluded from the two programs. Quebec recently set up I'm sorry to interrupt you.
You will get opportunity to talk further when we go into our round of questioning. We will now hear from Ms. Nord, representing Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Ms. Nord, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chairs, and committee members. I am speaking on behalf of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, which is the voice of Canadian business. We represent 200,000 businesses across the country, across sectors and across sizes, with our network that includes 450 chambers of commerce and boards of trade across the country, including our colleagues from FCCQ, which you just heard from. I'd like to thank them, the panelists before, and the panelists with us here today, and the committee for the opportunity to speak to you today about the Temporary Foreign Worker Program and LMIAs in particular. I will start by saying that immigration plays an important role in the inclusive growth and diversity of Canadian workforces and communities. The Canadian Chamber promotes innovative and effective policies and programmings to support new Canadians with labor, market, and community integration. Throughout the pandemic, we have seen rising unemployment rates, and expectations are that the employment rates will not level out and return, at least permanently, to pre-crisis levels in any time in the immediate future. However, despite these changes in the labor market, you heard last week from Statistics Canada, for example, that despite the fluctuating employment rates over the past year, throughout the crisis, the job vacancy rate has stayed at the same pre-pandemic level. Thus, immigration will continue to play an important role in filling labor market gaps. Although the Canadian Chamber has a number of recommendations to improve and modernize the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, we maintain that this program is a key component to the immigration system. We have also long supported pathways to permanent residency for temporary permit holders. In regards to labor markets, as we start to consider Canada's recovery post-pandemic, the Canadian Chamber believes that labor market analysis will play a critical role for a host of reasons, including immigration levels planning, and we can speak more to this in the Q&A. We also support the continued devolution of the immigration selection process, a continuation of moving to local levels of decision-making through the PNP programs, the Atlantic immigration programs, expansion of pilots, including the rural and northern immigration pilots, and the promised municipal nominee program. We need local solutions built by communities for communities with strong involvement from the business community to effectively address community workforce needs. With this said, I will now turn my attention to the focus of the committee's review. We canvassed a number of members heading into today, and some feedback we receive includes the following points, which I will note aren't limited to LMIAs, but that a broader commentary is needed to convey the totality of administrative and financial burdens. First of all, permit processing times have traditionally been very lengthy. You've heard any number of examples of this, which defy the needs, particularly in the sectors that are seasonal in nature. Secondly, it is not only permit processing that adds to the administrative length and burden. Additional factors including needing to establish an account with the jobs bank, getting vacancies posted, requiring a 1-month advertising period, and then LMIA processing times, et cetera. Also, LMIA and visa processing times have actually decreased through the pandemic, yet many members, especially in the agricultural sector, have said more proactive communication is needed with stakeholders to help manage the program in light of evolving travel restrictions, border policies, etc. We also have heard that consistency is needed in Service Canada, for example. There is often confusion between agricultural work permits and those in the low-wage stream. And finally, our members have also found that a lack of communication and understanding between ministries, departments, namely ESDC and IRCC, create further delays and administrative burdens. The Canadian Chamber today has one main recommendation, and that is the development and implementation of a trusted employers program. As for the time I have left, I'll fit in as many considerations as I can. First of all, such a program streamlines the application process and reduces the administrative burden for governments, businesses, and workers. The same businesses often apply over and over again. It removes the need to constantly reassess legitimacy and focuses on the merits of each case and application. Secondly, a number of our members, business partner associations and organizations have advocated for this for a number of years. UK and Australia have successful temporary TEP programs that have been implemented for more than a decade. We do have a precedent in Canada with somewhat with the global talent stream that does not require LMIAs. We recommend to start with a preferred status model, like a nexus model, with consideration over time to moving towards more of an across-the-board accreditation model.
Sorry for interrupting, Ms. Nod. Your time is up. You'll get an opportunity when we go into our round of questioning. We will now proceed to Restaurants Canada, and I assume that Ms. Lauren Vandenberg would be speaking on behalf of Restaurants Canada. Ms. Vandenberg, you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. You can please proceed.
Actually, it's going to be
I appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. Sorry for that. Sorry for that. Not a yes, you can please proceed.
No worries. Thank you very much. Restaurants and the many small and medium-sized businesses that make up the Canadian food service sector are a critical pillar of our culture, economy, and local communities. Before the pandemic struck, our industry comprised over 98,000 establishments from coast to coast to coast, serving about 22 million customers every day and contributing to 4% to the country's GDP. Prior to this crisis, the food service sector was Canada's fourth largest employer, directly employing 1.2 million people, being also the #1 source of first jobs for young Canadians. And we're also a reflection of Canada's environmental diversity. Women make up 58% of the food service workforce, 31% of restaurants owners, operators, and staff belong to a visible minority, and half of all Canadian restaurants are run by talented, hardworking entrepreneurs who came here as immigrants. Immigration was vitally important to our industry before we were hit with COVID-19. And this crisis has made the need for reforms all the more critical. Heading into the pandemic, the restaurant sector was already struggling to fill more than 60,000 vacant positions. One in 5 Canadians between the age of 15 and 24 are employed in the restaurant sector, but workforce participation among teens has been steadily declining, fortunately. By its nature, food service is very labor intensive, and finding any staff, let alone staff with applicable skills and experience, has become more challenging than ever. Then COVID-19 hit and turned on an already challenging situation into a full-blown labor crisis for our industry. Food service sector lost more jobs in the first 6 weeks of the pandemic than the entire Canadian economy lost during the 2008 and 2009 recession. No other industry comes close to this level of shortfall. 1 out of every 5 jobs lost during the initial lockdown from March to April 2020 was in Canada's restaurant sector. During this period, more than 800,000 food service workers lost their jobs or had their hours of work reduced to 0. At a time when all other industries have recovered an average of 90% of their pandemic job losses, the restaurant sector still hasn't recovered half of the jobs we lost, which represents 300,000 fewer jobs in the Canadian food service sector, and roughly 50,000 employees not currently working any hours. By the time restaurants across the country are ready to reopen and bring back their staff, many of these workers will have already found employment elsewhere. What began as a shortage of 60,000 restaurant positions before the pandemic could become a substantially higher labor crisis for our industry that could jeopardize the ability of many restaurants to stay in business. Donc, ce qui se passe avec
What is happening with COVID lockdowns and reopenings is that we're losing people. After the first wave, people came back to work for us. After the second wave, a number had already decided to work in another industry. But now we've got the third wave, and an increasing number of workers are permanently moving to another sector. So we were already looking for 60,000 workers before COVID, and now how many will we need when we reopen?
Knowing that the demographic pyramid will escalate that labor problem, we are looking into ways to attract and retain talent in our industry, and immigration is definitely a crucial one. When it comes with its share of challenges, but it is worth it, especially since immigrants enrich our industry from their culture to our table. Persistent labor shortages put a damper on investment and expansion. Even existing businesses are at risk if they can be properly staffed. The restaurant industry is one of Canada's largest employers, the biggest source of first-time jobs for youth, and an important part of every urban and rural community across the country. We are therefore proposing a comprehensive national labor strategy that includes food service stream of the temporary foreign workers program, which will be provided to you following this session. But in the interest of time, if you have 3 recommendations to remember today would be a fast track list process for specific jobs, which gets prioritized by provinces, from which Quebec, for instance, made a mistake of taking out 4 key positions for our industry. Second one, reduce the administrative burden on the small business owners who most heavily rely on program by increasing minimum temporary foreign worker work permits to 2 years and reducing the $1,000 fee and redefine it as per position fee, and ensure successful applicants are included in a form of fast track for immigrant approval. Finally, as Canada continues to shift.
Sorry for interrupting, Mr. Bourbier. Your time is up. You will get an opportunity to talk further in our round of questioning. With this, we will now move to our first round of questioning of 6 minutes each. We will start with Mr. Ellison. Mr. Ellison, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questionings. You can please proceed.
Thank you very much. Well, you were just getting to your main point, your third point, Mr. Baller. So, Oliver, why don't you give us that third point that you were going to finish off there?
Oh, I was going simply to conclude. The third one was really to ensure successful applicants are included in a form of a fast track for immigrant approval that we can of course hire them again and then potentially keep them in Canada and for them to become permanent resident.
Perfect. Well, I don't always give the government credit, but certainly what was just announced recently in terms of new pathways to permanent residency, I think will definitely help in that case. And so to all my guests today, I mean, one of the things I think is sometimes lacking, and I think all of you touched on it, is a sector specific strategy or a labor strategy in general. I think, I look at the talk is 20,000 applicants for temporary foreign workers in healthcare. This is the new program for permanent residency, 30,000 for temporary workers and other essential occupations, then 40,000 for international students. So I see her 90,000, and yet I think during the speech there, Oliver, you talked about you're short, 50 to 60,000 workers right now. So I guess the thought process is if we're looking at immigration of around 400,000 people a year, which what sort of the government's targeting, I guess you guys would not be opposed if a higher percentage than it seems to me like less than 25% could be thought of in terms of the stream. Would you not? That's my first question to the restaurants. Whoever wants to.
I do agree with you. Yes, pre-COVID we were 60,000 workers short. So definitely, if we can raise the bar, we would be delighted We need people in key positions, and we're not talking about people washing dishes. We are talking about cooks, chefs, restaurants managers, key positions here. Really, really important.
Perfect. And Isabel, we sort of cut you off as well, or you ran out of time in your final remarks. I know we had Food and Beverage Canada here. You guys, I'm not sure if you're members of those guys, but you certainly have lots of similarities. They talked about a shortage of 30,000 workers right now, going up to 65,000 by 2025. Certainly, you guys talked about the shortage of workers in your particular industry. My guess is you would certainly support any kind of pathway to permanent residency that targeted a larger percentage of these core skill workers, or entry level, whatever you want to call them, because I think I think it was well said in the last group of panelists. Not a lot of people that came to Canada may have understood the language to a level 4. So even getting them into our factories, getting them in our restaurants, it gives them a chance to learn the language. There's a whole bunch of benefits there. But certainly, you guys have also got it's not just people coming in and working minimum wage jobs. There's a whole level of expertise that you can use, and you can train people to do over time. Isabel?
Yes, you're quite right. Foreign workers that we recruit abroad, especially francophones in our case, because we're looking for permanent restaurants. It's easier for them to integrate into rural regions and work in our firms. It works very well. And when we could, under the permanent residency program in Quebec, then we had 200 people that were starting to work toward permanent residency, and the number we hope will double over the next few months. So it's a major issue for us to be able to offer the pathway to permanent residency.
Very much. And Lee, I wanted to ask you a question as well. I mean, obviously, I'm a big fan of Chamber. I've been a former Chamber president in my local area. I think the work you guys do is important. You guys have got a whole range of skills because you guys have got small to large businesses. Obviously, temporary foreign workers fits under high skill people as well. But would you not agree that if there was maybe sector specific or a sit down with business in Canada in general, we could look at, I mean, it wouldn't be hard to probably figure out the 400,000 fairly easier because there is a lot of shortages in pretty much every sector across the board.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the important point across sectors and across skills. They're not low or high, they're in demand. The other point, though, here from a chamber perspective as well, including, and I've alluded to it, including the sectoral focus, would also be a geographical or an overlay, having, a community focus as well. You've heard lots here about rural communities too, right? And the need to drive labor there as well. The other point I'll just try and make is as we talk about pathways to permanent residency here, we have any number of recommendations vis-a-vis the temporary foreign worker program, and even the name itself brings up some connotations. But what is really important about this program, despite its temporary nature, is that people arrive with labor market integration and a job offer. They hit the ground running. This is, unheard of in a lot of the other programs, and this sets temporary foreign workers up for success from the outset. So we would hate to lose that and any sort of discussion about modernization and changes we would recommend. Thank you.
Perfect. I think I'm almost out of time, Chair.
Yes, your time is up, Mr. Harrison. Now we will proceed to Mr. Sidhu, our newest member of the committee. Mr. Sidhu, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please start.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us here and providing your valuable insights. A closer look at labor shortages show that each province has a different challenge and therefore a different need. The right interpretation of this data for a national labor strategy must incorporate a varied approach to immigration. This approach should harness local expertise and accurately address regional immigration challenges. The federal government has begun with programs like the Agri-Food Pilot in close cooperation between multiple levels of government, but it's crucial that we all work together. Ms. Nord, in what ways do you think that we can move this forward with a multilateral approach with multiple levels of government?
It's absolutely what's needed, and I'd made that in our opening remarks. We've got 3 buckets of recommendations for immigration writ large, and one of them is that devolution of the immigration selection process, both to the provincial, but more importantly to the community level. What I would say about the rural and northern immigration pilots, 11 of them across the country, what was really innovative and interesting about those application processes is that a business community, either a chamber or an ECDEV, had to be lead that application. So it makes sure, again, that the business community is involved, and labor market integration is among the most important considerations, because that's what sets our immigrants up for success. To be sure, the other point here, and this is crucial moving forward, folks, is labor market assessment. It's not very, attractive or headline grabbing, but we need to know both by sectors, but across communities here, what is needed. So the devolution is key. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Norden. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on capacity. Should capacity of existing programs increase, or should new pathways be developed, in your opinion?
So as the Canadian Chamber, will surprise no one that we put an emphasis on the economic streams of immigration pathways. And what we say about all pathways or all streams is the importance of labor market integration and setting newcomers up for success from the outset. Would be the first point vis-a-vis that. I don't know if you've got any other specific questions, but it is important. Thank you.
Perfect. And Ms. Berg or Mr. Borbu, can you weigh in on your thoughts as well?
Sure, happy to jump in. Thank you for the question. I think one of the really interesting challenges facing the restaurant and food service industry, both during this current apocalypse, but more importantly in the before times and what we hope will be a strong revival and recovery, is the discrepancy between the multicultural metropolitan cities and the more rural areas. And the discrepancy is in the labor force and the labor shortages. And what we're hoping for when we speak about a dedicated food service stream, for example, the temporary foreign worker program, is a formula, a program, an initiative that takes differences into account, because it doesn't matter if the restaurant is in a more rural, smaller town community or a downtown financial core. They still need the same type of skill and dedication and passionate people to open their doors, whether it's front of house or back of house. And as Olivier highlighted in his opening statement, we were facing a pretty devastating labor shortage before this COVID-19 crisis. Right now, so many doors are shut across the country. So many operators are struggling to survive, to make ends meet, to keep the lights on. And at the end of that tunnel that we're still in, we can see the light. But at that light is also the looming labor shortage that we didn't address before this crisis hit.
Thank you for that. And then the temporary foreign workers program has been helpful in addressing labor challenges, although critiques suggest reformation to address chronic shortages is required to ensure that the TFWP is as responsive as possible to labor market needs. The federal government has moved to immigration models using permanent residency in tandem with work in specific sectors experiencing labor shortages, providing a consistent stream of workers for employers in struggling sectors, while also giving assurance for migrants to remain in Canada's permanently. Remaining in Canada permanently seems one of the most viable solutions. Ms. Berg or Mr. Barbu, can you share your thoughts with the committee on this approach?
Sure, happy to comment. I think one of the interesting pieces coming out of this conversation, again from before the crisis, but also during, is the challenges around taking full advantage of the TFW program, and that is the administrative burden involved in even applying. So as again, Olivier mentioned, that burden is financial. It's the high cost of entry for a lot of the operators, particularly those who have been extremely hard hit by this crisis. The increasingly frustrating turnaround times and updates. As I mentioned, without those back of house positions that maybe not be the most glamorous, a restaurant can't open. And once again, when we're struggling to sort of keep those lights on, every option to make the cost of doing business as easy as possible is even more crucial now.
Thank you for that. And I know I only have a few seconds left, so I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for taking the time to be with us here today.
Thank you, Mr. Sidhu. We will now proceed to Madame Normandian. Madame Normandian, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses. This is a very diversified panel that gives us quite a different perspective before and during the pandemic. I just want to talk about something that was raised at the beginning, but I want to hear about the measures that were put in place by the government in the restaurant industry and the retail industry. Usually when the unemployment rate was higher than 6%, then no workers could be brought in. So could you talk to us about what that means for you and the fact that even if there's a high unemployment rate, there is still a need for workers? Thank you very much. That's an excellent question. It isn't because the unemployment rate is over 6% that we have our labor needs met, because the situation can be difficult. We take young people into those figures, and they aren't necessarily the ones to fill all the positions. The need is large and growing. Thank you very much. If somebody else would like to speak to that, please go ahead. Perhaps Ms. Leblanc? No? Okay. With respect to regularizing the situation, we've heard from other witnesses that we have the same companies and the same workers that come year after year. So that being the case, should we extend the work permits and the LMIAs? Perhaps on behalf of Vaudimel, there is a huge administrative burden. Over the last 2.5 years, we have submitted over 110 requests under the LMIA and over 100,000 to the Quebec government. We need to have a better match between this program and the permanent residency program under the province. So we should have a 3-year minimum for the LMIA so that employers have an opportunity to get through the process without having to restart it. And I want to just address your previous point. I was trying to jump in then. It's certainly not just because we have a high level of unemployment in a certain region that we can match the needs. If there is a 7 or 8% unemployment rate, that doesn't mean that 300 or 400 jobs can be filled in a rural area. And that's been shown. Thank you very much. I would give you 3 points. There should be a 2-year minimum. There should be a fast track for workers and also for employers. Employees and employees are needed. So there are these applications that have to be made repeatedly. With respect to the program, something that's been brought up a number of times is that if there is a need for welders in a certain area, and if another company also needs welders, can't these companies work together? It should be the case when there is a shortage. Should we allow this to be sectoral, and perhaps it isn't the case right now, but when we have a very low unemployment rate, then we need more flexibility. Please, yes, definitely a sectoral approach and for particular occupations or positions. I don't know, Ms. Leblanc, if you would like to speak to this, or Ms. Nord. Please go ahead. Yes, I'd like to speak to that. From our point of view, the administrative burden isn't any easier, but it isn't the major issue. We understand that we have to demonstrate that we are doing our homework, that we are trying to hire locally. So the issue isn't really that. It's just that it's a very burdensome process. We have to provide a lot of evidence and documentation, and that becomes administratively very burdensome. But it isn't really the key point. Thank you. I think that I'm out of time, but Ms. Nord wanted to say something.
I'm Normandian. We will now proceed to Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies, you will have 6 minutes for your round of questioning. Welcome to CIMM, and you can please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Monsieur Banville and Madame Leblanc both touched on or referred to the labor shortage. I want to just ask a macro question. We know millions of Canadians have lost work through the pandemic, and I'm just wondering, pure economics, law of supply and demand would suggest that there are many more people looking for work or ready for work now. I know in the restaurant industry here in Vancouver, the Lower Mainland, we have restaurants closing and many skilled workers who are out of work right now. I'm just wondering, how has that impacted the sectors you represent, your need? I know you touched on it, Madame Leblanc. It may not have an impact regionally, but generally, has that increased the supply of domestic workers available for work in our country?
If I could answer your question, and thank you for it. We often talk about the unemployment rate and the number of people looking for work. I think that there's something important to keep in mind. I'll give you two examples. The fact that there is no overall generalized employment level. After all, it isn't the same across the country. We have in Alberta, for example, a shortage of 1,700 jobs, and back in 2 decades ago, we had the temporary foreign workers program there because we had a huge shortage, and people were applying. We have our plant there, and we have people who are applying, and this is great. So that's the situation. But in Quebec, in 2004, we didn't need people, but now we have 500 or 600 positions open. So there are always Canadians that are going to be looking for work, but the realities in the regions are what they are, and we need to have that flexibility. My colleagues from the restaurant industry understand this, of course. We need to have an intelligent temporary foreign workers program. We don't need the same measures applied everywhere. We need to take a regional approach because that is the need.
Ms. Nord, I think you mentioned some experience with some miscommunications between ESDC and IRCC that your members have experienced. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I just actually want to address your
please.
previous point as well. We often talk about this either or, committee members. It's a both and. moving forward. And labor mobility at a local level, skills mismatch is a huge issue that's wrapped into labor mobility. That's both from individual motivations point of view, but it's also a regulatory burden between jurisdictions here across our nation, and can say a lot more about that. Now, I'm actually I went back to the member who had provided that example, and this is what they said to me. It's a lot of acronyms here when I asked for the example, but they said, for an example, between IRCC and ESDC. If there is a change needed to ensure that the worker's name on the LMIA match the work permit, it goes back to some place called STPS, to WALI, to the employer, to ESDC. It would be a lot simpler if there was a communication channel between IRCC and ESDC specifically. So that's just an example of that. We also understand, we do get through the pandemic period, that there's a lot of changes happening rapidly, but within the temporary foreign worker program that sits in ESDC, it's not coming through to IRCC as quickly as needed or we would like. Thank you.
My colleague, Mr. Allison, mentioned this, and I want to pick this up for the new pathways to temporary foreign for TFWs to become permanent residents announced last week. There are these caps in place for each stream for a total of 90,000. 95 non-health sector occupations are competing for a cap of 30,000. That's an average of 315 applications per occupation. In your opinion, is that number equivalent or well matched to the interest to remain in Canada by the targeted groups? I don't know if anybody has an opinion on that. Ms. Nord?
Yeah, the short answer would be no. You've heard, we'll see from sector to sector to sector, streams and approaches. But what we need is across sectors and across skill levels. And we need a little bit of everything, right? And there was a question earlier on about how, should we do new streams or new pilots? I think what we need is an overall approach that's flexible according to community and needs of the sector they're in. Until we have the number of pathways to permanent residency that we do have temporary foreign workers, it's never going to match exactly. Thanks.
And I would add to that, yes, adapted to sectors, but adapted to regions as well, to Mr. Banville's point.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Your time is up. With that, our first round of questioning comes to an end. We will now proceed to our second round of questioning, and we will have 4 minutes each for Mr. Soraya and Mr. Reagan, and then 2 minutes each for Madame Normandin and Ms. Kwan. So we will start with Mr. Soraya. Mr. Soraya, you will have 4 minutes for your round of questioning. You can please proceed.
Madam Chair, thank you so much. When I come to the restaurant industry, I can write a book on it. I was associated with the restaurant industry for 30 years till recent years. I was the director of sales for one of them, for managing hundreds of restaurants, and we always had an issue. We always have an issue with the labor. When we were opening new stores up north in Ontario, we were taking the labor from downtown Toronto, put them in the hotels. That problem still exists today. This morning, I got a call from a franchise owner of McDonald's in my riding in a Markham Unionville, and he owned the restaurant between Richmond Hill, Markham, 7 of them. If you can advise the government, as per he told me that the restaurant industry was overlooked by the government, either the servers or the cashiers in the restaurant industry. What would you advise the government? They should be part of the new announcement, which they did last week.
Sorry for interrupting. I will stop the clock. The bells have started ringing for the vote to happen in 30 minutes. What I would suggest is that we can continue and finish this second round and end at 5:30. Do I have the unanimous consent to proceed with the meeting until 5:30? Seeing everyone in agreement, so we have the unanimous consent. We will end the meeting at 5:30. So you can, Mr. Soraya, you can please start. I will start the clock.
Thank you so much. Mr. Olber or anybody else want to take the question?
Lauren, you want to go or? Yes, indeed. To your point, we had a big labor shortage problem pre-COVID. In addition to that, it's going to be bigger, especially when we see provinces like BC, Ontario, and Quebec closing everything because of what I said in French in my opening remarks. With the COVID cycle, well, a lot of people now changed their mind and found jobs elsewhere in other industries. So yes, for us, it's going to be extremely important to have a lot more access, easier access to temporary foreign workers, and also to reduce the administrative burden. We need to find easier way to get access to these people because we need them and we need these qualified people.
I will just
Go ahead.
Just like 12 seconds. Merci beaucoup. I think the short answer is yes. Yes, I do think the restaurant industry was overlooked. Yes, I do think the restaurant industry frequently is overlooked when it comes to labor shortages because the idea is there's always a restaurant at the end of your street. I think what this crisis has taught us is that there won't be, and it's a great first step, the recent announcement, but it was disappointing that restaurants were once again left off the proverbial menu.
Thank you so much. I'm also disappointed in the restaurant industry is overlooked. It's one of the biggest industry out there throughout the country. They're the small and medium-sized restaurants. They're overlooked. Also, getting a complaint. This LMIA program is too expensive. It takes too long. It's arbitrary. When an employee said, "I need this person for this and this reason," and those people are rejected for no reason to the employee satisfaction. Is there anything you would like to add something up to it?
I will add from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce that we actually have a recommendation to insert an appeal process into the TFW program, which is absent. I also want to highlight the point that's been highlighted here is around small and medium-sized businesses and administrative burdens. Restaurants are sector is an example, but 98% of our small and medium-sized our companies across this country are small and medium-sized businesses. They're struggling. I will give you any number of stats here right now across sectors at a macro level. But we need to simplify. We need to make it easier, and we need to help them. Not only through this crisis but beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nord. Mr. Soraya, your time is up. We will now proceed to Mr. Reagan. Mr. Reagan, you will have 4 minutes for your round of questionings. You can please proceed.
Sorry, thank you very much, Madam Chair. My question is actually for all three groups, but in the short time I have, I think I'll start with Ms. Nord. In relation to critiques of the temporary foreign workers program, one of the things we've heard about is the need for employers to be able to access workers faster. You may be aware, of course, that Monday's budget dedicates $29 million to maintaining enhanced capacity to serve visitors who are applying for temporary visitors visas and permits. You may realize that you may be aware that this will help preserve departmental capacity to process documents like work permits. Along the same lines, what actions do you think the federal government can be taking or should take to further speed up processing and get people filling these vacancies?
Absolutely. To move anything that moves these processes online and faster tracking processes. We've welcomed many of the announcements from the budget this week, and that's the biggest among them. Again, I'll come back to my original recommendation. Recommendation number one is a trusted employers program, right? We can reduce that administrative burden of things that have to be applied to over and over again by allowing those who do this, through a nexus, a preferred program like they do in Global Skills Talent with the NOC codes, right? To allow that process to be eliminated and allow to, assess on the applications itself and even possibly get to a point where we don't have to do that anymore. Again, I'd spoken to the appeals process, that there's any number of things to do, but that's where I would say the number one and the lowest hanging fruit would be. Thank you.
Mr. Banville? C'est en sordine.
You're on mute. There we go. Thank you. Can you hear me? Very good. I think Ms. Nord's idea is very interesting. I think the basic thing for us is the number, the percentage. Our needs are great, But to balance this, we think that there should be a regional balance and that there should be a balancing, taking into account the different needs in the different regions, because we certainly want to hire Canadians. Maybe in one region we can hire Canadians, but in New Brunswick, for example, it is very difficult, and in Quebec. So I think 20% should be the minimum. And if we want to manage this intelligently and also respect Canadians looking for work, then we have to look at the different situations.
Mentioned a couple of Atlantic provinces. Actually, I'll ask Restaurants Canada, and I won't guess which one of you is going to answer. The Atlantic immigration pilot, as you probably know, makes some specialized adjustments to ease processing for workers and for employers. For example, of course, there's the designated employers, benefit from fee-exempt labor market impact assessment. And of course, for workers, spouses are able to apply for open work permits in more of the national occupational classification codes. If the government is to embark on developing other regional specific immigration programs, should it follow the same approach?
The short answer is absolutely yes. The Atlantic Immigration Pilot Program was a phenomenal success by almost any metric, and our operators in the region were positively thrilled about it, about the outcome, about the relative ease with which they were able to access that, again, enthusiastic, skilled labor, and the enthusiasm with which they often stayed on past as long as they could towards those permanent pathways. We've been asking for a good long time for similar programs.
Sorry for interrupting, Ms. Vandenberg. Time is up. You can submit written submissions if you don't get the opportunity to talk about some of the issues you want to raise today. With this, now we will proceed to Madame Normandin. Madame Normandin, you will have 2 minutes for your rounds of questioning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a question for whoever would like to take it about the flexibility of work permits. If right now we have one employer for one position with one employer, which doesn't make it possible to move to a different employer or get different experience within the firm and therefore get experience that will help move toward permanent residency. Should we have a system where regions or a certain sector are the priority? Yes. As Mr. Banville said, we have collective agreements that apply to everyone, Canadian or not, working for us. But we have seniority and other things that are taken into account for our positions. And we see that we have foreign workers who have the perfect experience as welders or other specializations, but we can't put them in those positions. So I think that we should have flexibility. I understand that there need to be parameters around that. And if the percentage is not high enough, we should be able to move employees from one position to another. And so I agree with your suggestion. I would add that, yes, we need flexibility. And if the employer and employee agree to change the nature of the work, then that should be done. Ms. Nord?
The agreement in that is key because the employer who brings in the employee or employees bears a burden for all of those administrative costs. I know this has been brought up before, but and I get there are issues being tied to a singular employer towards this, but if you come in and you've borne the cost and no sooner does someone arrive than they've jumped somewhere else, that's problematic. So that's an important caveat. Thank you.
Sorry for interrupting, Ms. Nod. Your time is up. We will now end our round of questioning with Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies, you will have 2 minutes for your questions. You can please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know who would want to answer this, but my mind is going to the very significant issue of housing. We know that there's clearly a serious affordable housing crisis in this country right now. And we know the federal and provincial governments work together to regulate the housing of temporary foreign workers. So 2 questions really. What suggestions would you give the government to ensure that we can actually find appropriate affordable housing? And number 2, is there any issue with the healthy housing right now, given the COVID pandemic that is unique to the situation now?
Quickly, yes and yes, right? And this is critical. Housing is an issue, across a number of sectors. And as there is currently a consultation on, our members take it very seriously. We take very seriously what has happened through the crisis as well. And it is a big wake up call, and it has to go hand in glove with anything going forward. Thank you.
Being from the Lower Mainland, I know that I hear from employers all the time that they can't attract and retain people because they simply can't afford to live here. So leaving aside the labor market issue, you have a livability issue. So I'm just wondering, any of the other sectors here, do you have specific problems or solutions to offer for how we can develop appropriate housing in the regions or sectors you represent?
I could answer this. So the issue of housing is crucial. First, I believe that we will always have to make sure that housing is acceptable qualitatively under the program, and we have to make sure that there is a standard. These are human beings coming from very far away, and they need to have appropriate housing. And we have a team looking for housing for temporary foreign workers.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up. With this, our panel for today comes to an end. I would like to take a moment to thank all our witnesses for appearing before the committee and providing your important input as we continue our study on the labor market impact assessment under the Temporary Foreign Workers Program. If there was something which you were not able to raise today, you can always send a written submission to the committee, and we will take that into consideration when we compile the report on this study. So with this, thank you once again, and we thank you for your time for appearing before the committee. Thank you. Bye-bye. And can I have, is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Thank you. So the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.